Hey friends, I hope you're doing well. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Rob Saylor and I teach over at Christian Theological Seminary, just up from IUPUI. And I also get to teach with your esteemed professor, Dr. Jason Aukerman. We do a course on conspiracy theory together. I'll be helping out with this American Supernatural class this fall. Uh, I do a number of things in religious studies, history of religion, religion and politics. But one of the things that I'm really interested in is art and music. And I've written on a number of composers, I've written on various theories of music. And then I also did a book on the band Radiohead. And the book that I did was from the perspective of Radiohead and religious studies. But what I want to do for this course is to just think a little bit about Radiohead in general. And more from kind of a philosophical, cultural studies standpoint. Uh, I don't want to presuppose that any of you know a lot about Radiohead or are Radiohead fans. Basic history of Radiohead is that they begin in sort of this very early 90s alt rock period. Um, think about when Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit is exploding, grunge is exploding, and then across the pond over in Britain, you have what is often referred to as sort of the Brit pop scene. So this is around the time of the emergence of Blur, Elastica. Eventually, Oasis is going to come out of that scene. And what do we mean by that? We mean sort of a combination of the sort of British pop Liverpool influence that obviously is most exemplified by the Beatles, then combined with some of the more aggressive, distorted guitar characteristic of grunge, all within, compared especially to the US scene, more of a song oriented, pop oriented structure. So, Radiohead, in their early work, is sort of in that Brit pop vein, but with a strong sort of alternative rock influence. So one of the most famous songs actually comes from their very first album, Pablo Honey, and that song is Creep. I'm not going to sing a lot for you, but I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo. And then, interestingly, in that song, which was sort of an MTV alt rock hit, right before the chorus, if you know the song, you hear this really strange, like, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. That's the guitarist Johnny Greenwood, in what sort of legendarily was a studio mistake that then was kept because the band thought it sounded cool. The reason I bring that up is that that gives a preview of the fact that Radiohead would very quickly transcend, in my words, would transcend that sort of alt rock grunge vibe into a much more experimental frame. So you think about some of their next albums, where as we move through the 90s, their second album, The Bends, if you heard typing, I wanted to make sure I had my dates right. 1995, right in the middle of the decade. Still very strong, still very song oriented, but a little more experimental. And what do I mean by experimental? Unusual noises, song structure that's slightly less linear than the standard verse, chorus, verse stuff. And then increasingly, what you might think of as sort of like bleak, dark, lyrical themes. And so as they continue on, one of the things that's really striking about Radiohead is that they've always had the same four members, or sorry, five core members, the same five core members. They've occasionally added auxiliary members, and you can think of their producer, their record producer, Nigel Godrich, as a kind of unofficial sixth member. Very similar as to how with the Beatles you could think of someone like George Martin as a kind of unofficial side member of the Beatles. But the trajectory is early grunge rock in the early 90s with a Brit-pop influence. 1995, The Bends, that keeps going but starts to get more experimental. 1997 comes along and it brings with it what I and many others see as one of the truly great albums of the 1990s, one of the truly great rock albums of the 20th century, one of the truly great rock albums of all time, and that is OK Computer. What is OK Computer? It's still got that sort of driving guitar grunge influence, but here you start to get much more you may be talking in the class about prog rock, progressive rock, the kind of thing that like Rush, Yes, Dream Theater, those sorts of folks were doing. OK Computer has a number of prog rock elements. The song structures are even more unusual. They're the compositions are longer, and there starts to be more and more of an electronic influence. And I'll send along a playlist maybe to your instructor. But if you just if you were to go on Spotify right now and look up Radiohead, OK Computer in many ways was sort of seen as one of their highlight albums, and so a lot of songs from OK Computer will come up. Paranoid Android, Karma Police, Let Down, No Surprises. Classic Radiohead tracks. And I should mention Radiohead is an absolutely awesome live band. I've seen Radiohead probably between 12 and 15 times, and then there are a variety of side projects, which I'll talk about, which I've also seen live a number of times. In fact, COVID willing, this Thursday I get on a plane to go to London for a couple of reasons, but I'll be seeing one of the newest side projects from Radiohead called The Smile. Again, if everybody stays healthy. So, 1997, they just released this big rock album. MTV's giving it a ton of plays. This is back in the days when music videos were still, when MTV still played music videos, you know? So, like, videos for No Surprises, Paranoid Android were getting a ton of play. They're opening for Alanis Morissette and then eventually doing their own headline tours. Heavily influenced by REM as well. The lead singer of Radiohead, Tom York, was really mentored by Michael Stipe, the lead singer of REM. Then comes the late 1990s, right at the turn of the century, and I don't know if any of y'all are old enough to remember, but there was a lot of anxiety at the turn of the millennium. This thing called the Y2K bug that was going to shut down all the computers because they hadn't been coded right. And then just sort of general, throughout American history, throughout world history, anytime there's a millennium shift, that often brings with it a sort of generalized anxiety. Where are we headed? What will the future hold? And into that, Radiohead makes a major stylistic shift with their album Kid A, released right at the turn of the century. Kid A has far fewer guitars, far fewer alt-rock song structures, and is almost more of a post-rock album. And what do we mean by post-rock? We mean a lot of the rock structures, but elongated, slowed down, messed with even further. So way more electronics, way more synthesizers, still some of the elements of that prog rock in there, but now all of a sudden, instead of being like a guitar-based band, they really almost seem more like a hybrid between electronics and guitars. Now, there were other major bands that were trying to do this at the same time. Two, I think, that tried and many people would fail. I kind of find their stuff interesting, but two that really tried it would be the aforementioned REM with their album Up. And then U2, probably one of the biggest rock bands in the world, did two albums that were heavily influenced by electronics, Zooropa and then Pop, released right around the same time. But many people say Radiohead is one of the most successful alternative rock acts to really make a strong electronic turn. And I think that was partly because Tom York, the lead singer and sort of main songwriter for the group, was and is a genuine fan of like hardcore electronic music, not even just EDM stuff, but like really sort of out there stuff characteristic of the Warp catalog. What used to be called IDM, Intelligent Dance Music, so Square Pusher, Aphex Twin, eventually like Flying Lotus, the LA beat scene. This sort of really cerebral sort of dance music, but you can't really dance to it. Boards of Canada. I should say, if anybody wants to like nerd out about any of this further, ask your instructor Jason to pass along my email. I'm happy to talk further about this because there's a lot happening at this intersection between electronic music and rock music. And then with their multiple albums after that, Radiohead sort of moves back and forth between some of these more electronic expressions and a return to more traditional sort of alt-rock songwriting. So another one of their really popular albums, 2007's In Rainbows, is much more of a traditional song structure. I don't like this comparison, but some people say, oh, it almost sounds a little bit like another British band, Coldplay. I'm a if you're a hardcore Radiohead fan, you sort of think Coldplay is Radiohead light, but maybe we'll leave that aside. But and no offense to the Coldplay fans out there, but but then they have other albums like King of Limbs, let's see, Amnesiac, and so on that really go more towards an electronic direction. In the meantime, and we can go down this rabbit hole, uh, Tom York, the lead singer, is doing more solo albums that are even less traditionally song structure, more electronic. Meanwhile, one of their main guitarists, Johnny Greenwood, is also a very significant classically trained composer, and he's starting to do more film soundtracks, especially for Paul Thomas Anderson films. So, films you may have seen: There Will Be Blood, The Master, um, the recent one, Heart of the Dog, I think is. But all of those are Johnny Greenwood soundtracked films. And then several of the other band members have done solo projects on their own. What do you think of when you think of the Radiohead sound? A lot of people think, oh, this is sort of the ultimate hipster act. They're difficult on purpose. Their fans are snobs. I won't deny that their fans can be kind of snobby. On the other hand, I've hung out with lots and lots of Radiohead fans, and I can tell you they come from sort of all walks of life. Some are sort of your typical indie rock geeks, but a number of hip hop artists, a number people. They tour all over the world. They sell out arenas when they do. I've seen them headline a sold out Madison Square Garden twice. Um, they're regularly on the main stage of Glastonbury in England, which is I think the largest music festival in the world in terms of attendance. And when I say main stage, I mean they're headlining the entire thing. So massively popular. And the reason why I think it's interesting that they're massively popular is, as I said before, starting very early on, the lyrical themes of Radiohead were quite dark. Environmental collapse, personal alienation. They have a number of cars that sort of have imagery of humans being crushed by machines, either figuratively, metaphorically, or sometimes literally. Um, so, what the conundrum of Radiohead is, why is it so massively popular for people to consume, be a part of music that is so dour in its outlook? And I think we can go about answering that question a couple of different ways. One is to just notice, in some ways, that's not at all unique to Radiohead. Nirvana, right? Their lyrics were also and grunge music in general, also tended to be really downbeat. Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, all the bands I love. Why do people like me love them? Well, because life is really brutal, right? And sometimes, if you want your music to be cathartic, if you want your music to resonate with your life as it actually is, you're not always going to go to like sort of happy, glossy, feel good kind of music. You want music that really helps you get the rage out, or music that makes you feel seen, music that you can identify with. And then you can add on sociocultural layers there. Chuck D famously called gangster rap the CNN of the ghetto, right? That is, music can reflect not only sort of individual alienation, but cultural conditions. So, as I mentioned, something that Radiohead in their recent albums have been writing quite a lot about would be climate change and the impact of human beings upon the natural world. And the fact that, climate change in our own time has become very deeply politicized. But many of us, I think, are walking around feeling a kind of deep existential despair and it's a kind of ambient despair over the ways in which we have this sense that not only might life be worse for our children than it was for us, but that we are headed towards a place where life on Earth will become unbearable, perhaps even impossible. And you can think about that both in terms of climate change, ecological degradation. You could also think about it, as thinkers have since the mid 20th century. You could think about it in terms of nuclear war, our capacity to inflict such violence upon ourselves and the planet that we literally bring about a species extermination. Radiohead sort of lyrically, and then I would argue musically, evokes that. And why do I say that they do that musically? Well, because a great deal of Radiohead's musicological technique and there are excellent books written on this. Brad Osborne's book, Everything in Its Right Place, would be a good place to start. Um, the Much of their music is atmospheric. It is the guitar playing is often referred to as very textured. What does that mean? That it really does try to evoke a certain kind of atmosphere rather than being centered around specific kinds of chord progressions and so on. A band that's heavily influenced that has influenced Radiohead's guitarists in this regard would be the Police, Sting's band. If you think about Police songs, if anyone's into classic rock, the guitar playing on Police songs tends to have this very sort of textured, layered, atmospheric approach, as can often a band I mentioned earlier, U2. The Edge's guitar playing is often quite similar. And then you throw on the electronic elements, especially the sort of offbeat, not your four on the floor, straight ahead, boom, boom, boom beats, but rather sort of skittering beats, beats that are hitting in a not entirely predictable pattern, but are in fact eventually sort of rhythmic enough to where they bring you in an almost visceral, embodied way into the kind of despair that they're evoking. So a great example of this would be their track off of Kid A, referred to as titled Idiotech. Idiotech, the beat is largely derived from a kind of a slight variation on a drum and bass break. So that sort of amen break, you know, where you have a very percussive kind of beat with a skittering backbeat in a way that gives you both the sort of deep hit of the bass, but then also sort of has this frenetic motion to it. And that is paired with the lyrics of Idiotech that describe sort of an apocalyptic event, presumably, the oceans rising, climate change, perhaps a nuclear war, some kind of event where people are panicking at the end of civilization. And in the midst of it, the chorus is everything all of the time. So lyrically, you also get this sense of constant acceleration. We're moving towards this, and we're moving towards this at an accelerated pace, and we're all on this moving train, and we can't figure out quite how to get off. So Radiohead occupies that space. It also occupies, with some of its other tracks, a space of kind of withdrawal. So a number of their songs are very slow, very atmospheric, almost folkish in their frame. So no surprises. Their most recent album as a band, Moon-Shaped Pool, has a number of sort of acoustic guitar-based tracks, The Numbers or Desert Stark or so on, that or a number of Radiohead fan favorites such as Pyramid Song after Amnesiac. You sort of zone out to them. How to Disappear Completely off of Kid A. I could go on and on. Point is, in addition to these sort of aggressive driving songs, they also have songs that sort of put many people kind of in their own headspace of alienation, withdrawal, perhaps resignation. That too, I think, is part of the appeal of Radiohead, is that if you listen to a given album all the way through, which is tricky in this age of Spotify, right? But Radiohead is still an album band. Their music's up on Spotify, finally. You can listen to it in terms of singles, but they really do approach their album craft as albums. So when you listen to an entire album, or if you go to a Radiohead gig and you get sort of their curation of a particular kind of set list throughout their career, you're going to have this push-pull between moments of frenetic embodied activity and a very sort of induced calm, but with an edge of dis-ease, an edge of unease about what this sort of bodily withdrawal might actually portend. And again, we're back to the question, why would that be such a sought-after experience by Radiohead nerds such as myself? There too, as I think you're seeing, what I'm arguing is that I think, in a way, it musically emulates and amplifies the kind of rhythms, the kind of emotional rhythms that our bodies are put through in late modernity, in late capitalism all the time. Radiohead's soundtracks, late modernity, post-modernity, hyper-modernity, pick your pick your terminology there. Radiohead soundtracks it, it amplifies it, and it does something that I think is absolutely crucial, which is collectively the band's music is always asking, where is the beating human heart within the machine? As I mentioned before, a number of Radiohead songs talk about human beings being crushed by machines. And even the ones that don't have that, oftentimes there's a sense of the machine as sort of system. Think about if you're a Franz Kafka fan, a lot of Kafka's fiction is about this sort of nameless, faceless, bureaucratic machine that is oppressing whatever is human within us. And moreover, not only is it oppressing us, it sort of causes us to buy into it. We sort of play along with it, even though part of us might be existentially rebelling against it. Radiohead, I think, is not only a soundtrack to the anxieties we all face, but ironically, even amidst all of the despair and all of the sonic evocation of the machine, there is always this search for what is the truly human within it. For instance, what is authenticity? What would it mean to live at peace with the earth and with each other, as opposed to being in the state of enmity or in the state of irreversible ecological degradation leading towards collapse? Is love possible? Is friendship possible? The very last song on the band's Street Spirits, which is I took the title of my book from one of the lyrics of Street Spirit, All These Things into Position. And that song is actually lyrically one of the bleakest in their catalog. Their images of dead birds and sort of endless rows of uniform houses, like you can't quite escape from it. All these things into position, all these things into position. The machine is just there, right? And then at the end, Tom York, who, if you ever heard him sing, he can have a very sort of soaring falsetto. At the end, there's sort of this soaring symphonic climax to the song in which York is saying, immerse yourself in love. Immerse yourself in love. And one of the conundrums that I think makes the song work is that at any given point you have to ask, is that just ironic? Is York being sarcastic? Is he making fun of people that say somehow love is the answer to all these massive structural problems? Or is it actually quite sincere, to where York is saying, no, love is the answer. Whatever else, there is still humanity, buried, crushed, subsumed, but still alive within the machine. And I think that indeterminacy is actually also quite crucial for why so many people gravitate towards Radiohead, because as much as we all may enjoy the occasional guilty pleasure of a really simple pop song, or sometimes revel in the brilliance of the Monkees' Daydream Believer, I think, is just a absolutely genius piece of music. It's a 3-minute feel-good little pop song, right? Not that that's bad, but I think oftentimes we don't want music that is didactic towards us. We don't want music that gives us easy answers, any more than most of us at the end of the day really want to live on any kind of art that gives us easy answers. TV that is just pablum, or everything that's just sort of shimmering reality TV with no substance, or movies that are like that have such a clear moral that it's like, oh, this is an after school special. It's not actually a piece of filmmaking, of cinematography. We don't want easy art. We want art, again, that resonates with us and resonates with the complexity of our lives. And we live our lives, most of us, in a space of indeterminacy and in a state of suspension between despair and hope, or at least the possibility of hope. And what I'm saying is, I think it's really key to Radiohead's music as well, that they are not didactic. They don't give us the easy answers. And in fact, they don't even portray or embody absolute hope. They portray and embody the state of indeterminacy, the state of oscillation between hope and despair. And I think for many of us, that is what we want in our art, because we can recognize ourselves in it, but also have that truth reflected back to us in ways that are beautiful and compelling. And that's the last thing that I'll say maybe about Radiohead is that I've tried to talk both about the lyrics and some of the musical strategies, but they not only do they embody this sort of oscillation between hope and despair, but they embody this clash between despair and beauty. So, for instance, another track, one of my favorite tracks of theirs, Let Down, off of OK Computer. Again, lyrically, it's a very bummer track. It's got a number of the things I mentioned, sort of faceless bureaucratic transportation, corporate structures, mechanized structures, and then an evocation of life literally being crushed under it, crushed like a bug in the ground. But these very dour lyrics are set against a sort of arpeggiated, beautiful, light, airy guitar run that gradually becomes more and more symphonic. And there are melodies, counter melodies, beautiful harmonies as we head towards the climax of the song through the choruses. In other words, the song itself embodies this tension between recognition of the ugliness of our situation, yet still sort of reaching for beauty amidst it. I said I wasn't going to get much into religious studies with any of this, and I won't, other than to say, I think that, like, within my field, a lot of the reason why people, even people who are religious, don't really like a lot of religious music, or at least don't have very high expectations for it, is that so much of it is didactic. It sort of tells you what to believe, it tells you what to feel, it tells you to be happy. Radiohead, again, I think, is a soundtrack, whether one is religious or not, whether one is hopeful or not, whether one is optimistic about our possibilities. If you're a Radiohead fan, that's an inside joke. Optimistic about our possibilities, or whether you live in a state of real anxiety and diminished expectation of hope. Radiohead captures that, does not offer easy answers. And I think that that is not only artistically very significant, but again, we can also go back to the question of what is it about this that sells out arenas, headlines festivals, sells millions and millions of albums. I think the world is hungry for art that does this. And certainly I think the kind of rock and roll pop traditions, electronic traditions, and the melding genre fluid way in which Radiohead approaches this, they exemplify that, I think, in a very compelling way. So, again, happy to talk further. Your instructor knows how to find me, so really wishing you good vibes and good luck as you finish out this awesome course. Take care, all.